So I don't have many. Well, that's a lie. I do have many theories about.
It's a hell of a start.
About sports.
Some.
I have one theory that I believe applies to this Dan Snyder story, which we talked about briefly with Don Van Natta yesterday. But I wanted to follow up on today, David, because I realized as I was dissecting it piece by piece that this is something that I really wanted to talk to you about. Because my theory about sports and life is centered around incentives. What do people have to gain in any given moment? And so when I look at the Knives Out murder mystery aspect of who leaked John Gruden's racist, homophobic emails, the ones that got him eventually ousted from the NFL, I was thinking about, yes, how in all of this, DeMaurice Smith, the head of the NFL Players Union, who was racially insulted directly by Gruden, is of course one suspect.
Motive.
How Roger Goodell, of course, who hates John Gruden apparently, and also wants to be tough on racism.
Motive.
And also keep DeMaurice Smith around because DeMaurice Smith, it turns out, is bad at his job.
He's the Tony Clark of union leaders.
A useful union antagonist.
Motive.
And then there's Dan Snyder, who, alongside Rock Nation, Jay-Z's company, and his own law firm, they wanted to both deflect to Bruce Allen that Bruce Allen, the guy Gruden was emailing, was the problem, and also curry favor with Roger Goodell, the man leading, in some sense, maybe not enough of a sense, the investigations against Snyder himself.
Motive.
And so in all of
this,
that's
every part of the equation.
It's crazy. And so Don Van Natta and Seth Wickersham do this story in ESPN, and there are theories, and everybody is a plausible suspect. And I think it's so amazingly on the nose when chaos is a ladder in this way. When in this scandal, everyone's seeing...
You have to say it in the voice. You have to do a little finger voice.
I think only you can do the voice.
No, I can't do the voice.
You're a voice person. Brockmeyer told me you're like the voice person.
You're like the
Chaos
Daniel Day...
is a ladder.
There it is.
What
The Daniel
voice was
Day-Lewis of Meadowlark Media.
That was DDL?
No, it's Game of Thrones.
Little finger, Game of Thrones.
There's some Game of Thrones in
Never seen
this,
it.
David.
Chaos is a ladder.
Chaos is a ladder is what I think about when I think about this story.
This is a story that starts with money. This is a story that starts with Dan Snyder thinking that there's an investigation going against him that has a chance to rob him of his team. And it's a story that starts with Dan Snyder doing things that should make it so you can't own a team. And that gets lost way too much. All of this started because Dan Snyder is despicable in every way. As a man, as an owner, I don't know him as a father, but at what he did and what he does, that is enough to be sterlinged.
I believe that Dan Snyder, his fatherhood aside, has been investigated by enough levels of our government, federal, local, congressional, the NFL, and all of it is unprecedented. Unprecedented.
And he got caught in the same way, a lot of the same way that Sterling got caught, where he thought that he was above the law, quote unquote. And it turns out that when Roger Goodell has your back, you can be above the law. When you lose Roger Goodell and other owners, then you have a problem. Dan Snyder actually believed that there were not 24 owners who would ever force him to sell. That's the number it takes in the NFL is 24. He thought he was Teflon.
He also seems to think that because of the blackmail PowerPoint, like all of these people are complicit in bad behavior or running their clubs a certain way. So I certainly can't get ousted from this when everyone else is doing something too, which is, to be fair, true of a lot of clubs, but also is not an excuse for like criminally bad behavior in some cases where he's being investigated by federal authorities for business practices and sexual harassment cases.
And has been personally accused of sex crimes.
So the blackmail PowerPoint, we touched on it yesterday. I want to touch on it again for people who may not have been
MAIL. Blackmail. I made this mistake yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, no space in between.
Yes. I actually don't know the etymology of blackmail, but I do know the result of it. It is when you know something and you say, I'm going to tell someone else what I know unless you do something for me. And Dan Snyder went into an owners meeting and committed the number one crime you can commit is he made a presentation. Normally, you're on the receiving end of presentations at owners meetings.
This was to Roger Goodell. This was to
All
the
the
league.
owners, executives,
Yes.
everybody. And he puts up emails that he had gotten, that he had found, that put people in a position of saying, uh-oh, I wouldn't want that on the front page of the paper. I wouldn't want people to see what I've written. And what Dan Snyder says, if you don't play ball with me and not release the Beth Wilkinson, to say nothing of Mary Jo White, we're talking back
The
an
multiple
investigation ago.
investigations,
This
yes.
is an inception level of investigations. If you do not do what I want, I'm leaking every single one of these. That is great blackmail. And guess what? They said, forget it. We're going to leak first.
Everybody
It was a race to the leak.
was leaking. And it's so funny because John Gruden's lawyers are doing their forensic analysis of figuring out who does Dan Snyder like in the media. And he does not like the Washington Post. The Washington Post conspicuously got none of the leaks, but the New York Times did. They found stories that had been written by the reporters in question, apparently, that indicated that, they've had a little bit of favorable coverage to Dan Snyder in the past, seemed to be corroborating who got certain leaks in this news cycle.
We would have a system in place where we had a list of which reporters were friendly to
Of
us as a
course you
front
did.
office and which were not. And we would leak to the reporters who would give us positive. And I'm not impugning reporters and their neutrality at all. But this is real.
Oh, this is what I wanted to talk to you about, David. It's because behind the curtain of how to run a sports team, behind the curtain of politics in America, leaking and favor trading and access journalism, all of this stuff, as much as we want to be very pure and idealistic about even the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, on a micro level, these decisions are being made every day.
I didn't invent it. I can only tell you that I played within the rules as were presented and taught to me about how you deal with media. And again, now that I'm on the other side, I understand that I'm not impugning the quality of these reporters and what they do.
No.
But the way you get scoops, do you think all the guys at ESPN making $10 million a year, that there's no quid pro quo for the information they get? Like, are you...
Wait, who's making $10 million a year?
Or is it more?
Schefter?
Are they?
Is that,
I may be wrong.
maybe if Don's making that much,
Don
we should have him back
Vanetta,
on.
Don is
Underpaid.
definitely not making that
I'd
much.
like to
No,
go
I was
swim in his
talking Woj
place.
and Schefter. I was talking and
Got
Shams,
it.
those
Okay.
people.
But to speak broadly about how this all works, if you are hunting a story and you're playing the long game, if there's a bigger game you're playing, it is not uncommon for a reporter to do something in the near term that is small to gain the trust and favor of a source who will then give you something bigger that was worth the earlier squeeze.
It's what they do in law enforcement when you try to have someone turn state's evidence, where you use someone to get to someone bigger. Hey, I'll let you off. You did something really wrong, but I won't put you in jail, but you got to tell me who told you to do it. That's very commonly used in our criminal justice system, and certainly in our journalistic system. Is that a word?
Well, it is in the Wall Street Journal sense here, because they are, in fact, again, this is John Gruden's legal team. I want to source this to them. I have not done this analysis, but the point is, it is deeply unsurprising that leaks happen to be the knife of choice, that this was how they exerted public pressure that got, in the end, a lot of agenda items checked off the list for all of the people that I started this conversation with.
The writer of that story was the babysitter for my daughters in New York when he was a 12-year-old, when I would leave the kids to people. Andrew Beaton got this great story. And when you
Look at me,
It's a weird one.
when you get access,
Not as weird as my parents are divorced, but also weird.
when you get access to a story like this, and the Daniel Snyder story has been feeding the journalistic desires of so many papers for so long, and it's coming to an end, in theory, on July 20th, and then word comes out today that the sale's in jeopardy.
That begs the question, who do you think benefits from Don and Seth's story coming out on ESPN? Because obviously people that feel inclined to talk to them have a reason for wanting this to come out now.
Well, everybody, of course, everybody has their own agenda if you're a source, right? It's very rare that a whistleblower is truly motivated by nothing but the pursuit of truth. But
we pay whistleblowers now, so of course that's not it.
And I think there's an argument for why that should be so. But I believe that even though there is this conflict of interest in every human heart, right? Even if that is so, if you can verify the story, like the idea that the Wall Street Journal should not have published these emails, I'm not saying that.
Okay, good.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that journalism is a messy thing. Like the idea that you got a scoop from a source who had a motive, and therefore, because of that motive, you cannot publish that scoop is not what I am saying. I am just saying that when we read stories of this magnitude, we should be wondering, what do the people leaking have to gain? And if that is okay in the reporter's calculus, then maybe it's okay to publish.
But aren't you going with other sources as well? You don't publish
Exactly.
based on one source with an agenda.
They had documentation in this case. This is actually he actually emailed this.
So then it doesn't even matter
But it matters in the sense that there's a larger story. So the Wall Street Journal is inside the Russian nesting doll of scoops. Don Van Natta and Seth Wickersham, the bigger container that they're now wondering, okay, but why did you get this?
Right. And there's also the aspect of like the newsworthiness of what was in the email, which I think it's incredibly important for players and fans and the league. They probably already did know, but it's important for people to know that there is an active head coach saying these things on the record via email. Like that's important.
It's
to
a
know.
huge story.
Everyone should be aware of
fireable.
that. Yeah.
It
was.
Yeah, and all of these things, Jess, are coexisting. But what I'm calling for is just a realistic understanding of how these things get brokered.
Yeah, it was only fireable, just so we can discuss that for a quick moment, once it went public. They knew about it.
Of course.
And that's a big difference. So let's not pretend that the NFL or Roger Goodell or Mark Davis or John Gruden, none of this would be going on but for it being made public.
Well, this is the story. And this is why this story is so great. This is why I'm so glad that I want to get to why it is that Roger Goodell ended up being the guy who ordered the code red. I want to get to David. There's so much here that's indicting
so good that he did it
of everyone.
So when he orders a code red, people are going to die.
So a little cleanup on David's figure of speech. Roger Goodell ordering the code red, people dying. I believe we're talking figuratively.
I'm not accusing Roger Goodell of murder.
Very good. So Roger
Financial
Goodell,
murder.
Well, I bring this up because Roger Goodell also has a headline that he does enjoy today, David, that you just shared with me in the break.
So the NFL is now approaching $25 billion in annual revenue. And the way you add that up, if you're a league, it is the local revenue of all 32 teams plus the national revenue that the NFL gets through its broadcasting deals. So they have the new deal with Amazon for Thursday night. They have the new YouTube deal for the Red Zone or Direct Ticket. And you add that all up, plus what teams do when you go to games in Dallas or Miami, wherever you go. $25 billion. They've passed the other leagues, and what they're trying to do is widen their lead. So Roger Goodell looks at everything through the lens of what is going to get in the way of our revenue continuing to build. That's all he's focused on.
That is the biggest Russian nesting doll. Inside of this, all of this stuff that we're about to dive back into is inside of the larger container that is full of $25 billion annually.
That's how Rock Nation got hired.
Yes.
$5 million a year.
We got to talk about this. Yes.
Roger Goodell said, wait a minute, there's some people out there and some sponsors who are upset with us because of the Trump comment about Kaepernick and kneeling. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk to Jay-Z, and we're going to pay him $5 million a year, and we're going to sports wash our racism. That's the plan, and it's a great plan. And then all of a sudden, it worked the opposite. And Rock Nation may have gotten involved because they're involved with Snyder.
Yes. So the incentives for Rock Nation here, right? They got into the biggest business in American culture.
Brilliant.
It is brilliant. They saw chaos being a ladder. They climbed up the ladder, at the foot of which was spray painted "End Racism," right? Literally doing that in the end zone. And they said, there is more here for us.
All it will cost is $5 million a year. We're a $20 billion industry. $5 million to Jay-Z. What could be easier? And we'll get immediate credibility. $5 million to buy credibility and racism. That's amazing.
It's a great deal. And so the appearance of why Roger Goodell wanted these emails leaked from John Gruden. So there's the hatred of John Gruden, who's always been a thorn in his side. We can talk about that too, I suppose. But I'm most interested in this appearance of being tough on racism.
That's if you are going to partner with Jay-Z and you are trying to rehabilitate your image in order to protect your large Russian nesting doll of $25 billion, you've got to be tough on crime, right? You stand up on the podium, you're running for office, and you say, I'm tough on racism. And look, I hired a person of color and gave him $5 million, and I'm going to get Gruden out of the game.
Exactly. And that was the next step. Not only will the emails be released, but we will then oust John Gruden, one of our most famous, well-paid figures.
It's so brilliant, actually, in how Machiavellian it is.
Chaos is a ladder.
And it works every time. So the problem is that Dan Snyder, Mark Davis to a smaller degree, but when Dan Snyder gets involved, it got a little messy for Goodell. And commissioners don't like mess. So when I say the order of the code red, when something looks to be jeopardizing, CTE, that's a code red. We have a CTE issue. Code red, I want big helmets. I want padding. We have to show that kids are playing. We can't have kids afraid to play football. That was a major code red. Racism, emails being leaked, code red. We're going to need firings. Gruden's gone. What's next? Snyder, sexism, racism. We got to get him out. It never stops. All in the name of protecting, A, the league, and B, his salary.
And Dan Snyder snuck in there trying to, grease those wheels towards John Gruden being ousted, towards all of the stuff you just described, because he also wanted to save his own ass.
And save his franchise. He didn't want to sell.
Correct.
He does not want to sell. None of the owners who are forced to sell want to sell because, by definition, they wouldn't be forced to sell.
And so Dan Snyder, being this guy who saw an opportunity, only for then the spotlight to turn back on him, it does make me wonder, to what extent are all of these people playing? Are they chess grandmasters, David? Or is this checkers? In your estimation, having been in these rooms, having analyzed this story, is this brilliance or is this actually a certain desperation?
I'm sorry to say, and this may be self-reflection as well, but you'd be shocked. You think the first time I ever walked into an owners meeting was December of '99. And it was my view that it was going to be full of these brilliant people whose names I'd known. I'm going to see George Steinbrenner and all these people. And then you get to know everybody, and you realize that they're just a microcosm of society. There's some really smart people and some really dumb people. There's people who buy stocks based on whether or not the slogan or the logo makes them happy. And there's people who have – John Henry has a way to look at numbers like Rain Man and turn nothing into dollars in a proprietary way. Brilliant. But then you talk to him and realize that you can't have a conversation with him. So people are all over the board. And what the commissioner does is he's the ringleader. He's P.T. Barnum.
Right.
And he gets paid a lot of money to be P.T. Barnum.
He is. I've always thought of Roger Goodell as this meat shield, right? He is there to be the villainous face of a bunch of people who don't want to be the villainous face of something. I'm also realizing through stories like this, and again, it's such a great bit of reporting, even as it becomes meta about why is this being reported. It's so great because Roger Goodell is also being accused of playing just enough chess to surprise me. Like the DeMaurice Smith stuff, David. The idea that that guy is actually someone the NFL wants in power. So DeMaurice Smith was a target of John Gruden in these emails. DeMaurice Smith was racially dog whistled against by John Gruden, dumb Oris, the thing about his lips, all of that stuff. And Roger Goodell wanted DeMaurice Smith to be a public victim in this way, just enough to get him back.
So did Smith, though, because one of the possibilities is he leaked the email because guess what? He was up for re-election, and he wanted to keep his job, and the players elect, and it was a tie. He was not going to get reelected. He said, this is a great gig. I may be getting taken advantage of by the man, but let me tell you something. I'm making millions. I want my job. He may have leaked the email from Gruden, and because right after it was leaked, guess what? He got reelected.
By a single vote.
Uno.
It's just so
so
perfect, man. And then he later bragged, a source told ESPN, that the leak had worked. And so here are all these people raising their hands in celebration that this thing worked because someone said some awful stuff. And so when John Gruden is there, frustrated and conspiracy-brained because Al Davis, his former boss, the grand old owner of the Raiders, had always had theories about how Roger Goodell and even the NFL, Pete Rozelle, had it out for the Raiders, the pirate ship of that organization, right, of the NFL, how they always had it out for him. John Gruden, obviously, has on the one hand, yes, conspiracy brain. On the other hand, it exactly right. He is being used as a board game piece in a larger scheme.
And that's why he thinks he's going to win his lawsuit.
So we should talk about this lawsuit.
So this lawsuit, it's shockingly about money. John Gruden is suing Roger Goodell and the NFL under the theory that Roger Goodell ruined his career and that he no longer has the ability to make money. The lawsuit to get paid on his Raiders contract, that would be against Mark Davis. Roger Goodell would not be a part of that. But future opportunities, he feels he's been sullied to the point where he needs to be. Are you okay?
Oh, yeah, I'm just...
Was that dog hair?
It was not dog hair.
Are you?
Oh, come on.
What? Did you see what he was just doing?
I was
The last
taking
10
hair out
seconds?
of my face. I felt a hair.
Do we need to get hair and makeup back in here, Pablo?
We might.
You need
Give
a
a little
touch up.
spray?
We've had hair and makeup today. I think it's the first time in the history of this show that people have come in professionals to
Since 2019.
since 2019.
Or maybe early 2020.
In this era, the first time. And yeah, I'm a little self-conscious, David.
I think you look terrific.
Thank you.
You're not shiny at all. I've already had 2 people step in and say you're shining. The shining.
But speaking of people who are oily, John Gruden actually is working as a consultant for the New Orleans Saints right now, by the way.
He's not getting paid.
He's
Hold
tutoring Derek Carr, whatever that means. But anyway,
What do you think he's getting paid for that? Couple hundo?
his lawsuit is, of course, about a grander scale of income.
He also wants other people to be brought down with him. He doesn't want to be the face of the email leak, the face of the racism. He's very much like Danny Snyder. It feels better when you could say, wait a minute, we're all racist, than saying just I'm racist. And so Gruden is trying to get out there the truth about why. Why would you point? His basic argument is, why am I the fall guy for all of the misogynists and racists in this league?
Dan Snyder.
He's saying the same thing?
Snyder. And so I want to validate the language you used to end the last segment, because what Gruden has been saying, and this is quotes from the ESPN piece, that yes, a code red was ordered, that the commissioner executed, quote, the kill shot on his career, quote, a bullet to the head, a massive hit job, as he is also watching Dan Snyder now negotiate publicly for indemnification, legal immunity from all of the investigations that we have been describing.
The indemnification is not about that. It's about the money. So the indemnifications, when you have a contract, I don't mean to correct it. I just
No,
wanna
no,
make
no.
sure
I-
it's not a legal issue.
Make my figure of speech more specific. I want to know this.
So specifically, you're negotiating an indemnity, which means that if anything happens going forward that you didn't know about, you have to pretend you knew about it. Don't come running to me. So an indemnification means that, hey, if something bad happened that I did and you have to pay money, I'll pay you back. So Dan Snyder's selling the team to Josh Harris. Josh Harris says, hey, Dan, I didn't realize that the roof was broken and I needed a new roof, as an example. Well, Dan Snyder would say it was right there in the due diligence. Sorry, new roof, you have to pay for it. That's the end of that. An indemnity is when something comes up that was either not known, or you negotiate when something is known, who's going to pay for it. And that's the case now with Dan Snyder. There is a chance that there's legal liability.
Yes.
Money, not
Yes.
jail time, that he will have to pay money as a result of the Mary Jo White investigation, as a result of what's
Yep.
going on with the financial improprieties about how he declared revenue.
Lots of
with
balls
Notre
in the
Dame.
air.
I think it was a Notre Dame game that he did not declare as a college game. He declared it as a pro game, whatever the case may be.
It was a Notre Dame Navy game at FedEx Field, I believe, and they didn't. They sold tickets at one price and kept it at a certain. They were keeping a separate book with.
So there
the
could
real
be
ticket
money
revenue.
implications.
Right. It was something like that.
And the indemnity would be, hey, NFL, if I have to pay money, I'm Dan Snyder, I'm not doing it. come get me because I'm going to be on my yacht and I don't want to hear from you. Therefore, I'm not going to indemnify you, so screw off.
$25 billion.